안녕하세요. Welcome to this special lecture. It's a great pleasure and honor to meet you all here. My name is Young-Hoon Kim. I'm trained as an anthropologist. I'm teaching in the Department of Korean Studies at Ewha Women's University. This is going to be a rather brief lecture about the topics of my research, and it has to do with the image of Korea and national identity and representation, visual representations. These are the key words associated with my research. Well, let's begin with the slides I prepared for this topic. So the main title is Images of Korea in Tourism Posters from 1970s and 1980s. Symbols of specific cultures or nation. Every nation has symbols and signs and icons. We can't think of, let's say, Paris without Eiffel Tower and Statue of Liberty in the US, and also the Great Wall in China. So these are kind of major symbols represent those nations, and it has very strong influence these days. So I'm beginning from this very simple observation. I began to explore how those images were created and why those images were selected and how those images transmit certain messages. And if we can apply those questions to Korea, what are those early images and what are current images? So these are the kind of questions in my mind. So I conduct research. Specifically, I looked at the tourism posters. So this is what I mean here, how images of Korea have been established and recreated. The interesting notion here is I'm not talking about images, your images about Korea. So images from outsiders, how we think or imagine a certain nation or group of people. Instead, this is kind of opposite direction, how Korea established their own image and how they represent certain image. So these are two different kind of process, and it could be very interesting to compare in these different contexts. But our focus is how Korea represent themselves. Okay. Briefly, I looked at the history, how Korea has been viewed by Westerners and outsiders. So again, this has to do with that arrow from outside. So very first visual images of Korea, we have example here, a map in the 12th century. Let's look at it. As you can see here, in earlier maps in 17th century, the Korea was depicted as an island, which is totally wrong. It's connected to the Asian continent. It's a peninsula, but that means the owner of drawer of this map didn't have accurate information about the very location of Korea and what it looked like. And again, this corrected in later map is now connected to the continent as a peninsula. You can see the Japan right there. And earliest written records go much further earlier, 7th century. In especially Arabic literature, there is a brief descriptions about the three kingdoms exist in Korean Peninsula, but it's very sketchy and brief. And the first serious record was done by a Dutchman, Hendrik Hamel. He remained in Korea from 1653 until 1666. So it's about 13 years long experience. He originally sailed to Japan, but he was shipwrecked and happened to be in Korea, and he was basically caught as a prisoner and stayed for that time. And once he went back, he made a report, his experience, and became very well known, actually first Western records about the Kingdom of Korea in 17th century. These are one of the Hanel's own handwriting. It contains, again, his experience during his stay in Korea. Okay. Again, these are other type of literature, and then images has to do with Korea. This is one of German newspaper. As you can see here, this shows kind of genre painting, popular, which was very popular in 19th century, and also it's a very popular form of kind of image distribution in 19th century. There's postcards. It's a color image. I'm afraid you can't see the details, but if you look at it, there's a very the misinformation here. Let's say these are kind of typical Polynesian women, but it's supposed to be a Korean in this postcard. So again, this is all exotic images used, and also another picture image of Korea. This again one of Korean architecture. But again, this pole is rather Japanese culture and others. So it's kind of mixture of those information in Asia, kind of mixed together, and again, a lot of wrong information over there. Starting 19th and 20th century, this is when the great number of Westerners start to visit and live in Korea, the missionaries, politicians, and tourists, and others. And in terms of quantity and also quality, these images of Korea multiplied and begin to appear in Western journals and etc. So this is a very important period. And these are the kind of phrase used in their descriptions of Korea to their counterpart. The land of morning calm. Again, this is typically this is translation. Let me change the color of the very meaning of the term Chosun. So the very term morning calm is from the name of the country at the time is Chosun, right in Korean right here. But if you write in Chinese character, it looks like this. Morning. Morning freshness or calm. Sorry, there's one more dot there. So again, this literal translation of that term. And also hermit kingdom, of course, is not known very well to them until the time, so they use the term hermit kingdom. And also the land of white pajamas. Again, this kind of impressions they have about the Korean traditional clothing. This is, you can see the Westerners reporter, I think, smoking cigar and drawing something on his notebook, and this kind of 19th century Korean kind of watching him, and very curious about what he's doing. Again, this whole scene appeared in the journal The Graphic. I have the exact date here, 1895, October 27. So he's the observer and they are the observed. So they're a hermit, and probably the readers of the graphic were surprised to see the whole events here. And again, it shows the picture of this market. There is a gate there. I mean, and also this picture and also this drawing. I mean, this is all white, wearing their costume here, and also it's very roomy. Again, it has with the floor sitting culture of Korea. So it's very roomy trousers. There's very interesting features. But again, this very color kind of impressed the early Westerners. So that's why Koreans start to be called, in a way, the people of white pajamas. Of course, these are not sleeping or sleeping wears. So, okay, so that's basically the historical background from 7th century, and also the early report by a Dutchman in the 17th century. I mean, these are kind of steps through which Korea became to be known to Western people. And now we change these discussions. Instead of talking how outsider view Korea as an image, but now how Korea represent ourselves to Westerners by creating certain images. So I looked at, as I said before, the specific tourist posters made by a Korean Tourism Bureau. And once these posters were made and selected, it's the source of wider distribution in postcards, of course, and also other general publications. And I looked at from 1973 until 1988, and only the prized selection of those posters I analyzed. Let me begin with the 1985 Grand Prize work. This is what it looks like. It's almost 24 years ago. As you can see, this is kind of a formation of Korean traditional dance called 부채춤. You can see the woman lining up. This shows actually the quarter of the formation. Actually, it's whole circles they form. And look at the visual descriptions here. They have this yin-yang symbols. They have these folding fans. And look at the faces of this dancer here. It's all red lips. And that's pretty much it. The rest of facial description is just nothing there. I mean, it's just so blank. So strong, very powerful red color, and also image of a traditional dancer. That's pretty much it. And so I just show the grand prize of 1985, but I realized after analyzing other posters at the time, that one of the biggest characteristics of this period is the strong utilization of traditional images of women. Let's look at it. So the femininity, that's the very interesting characteristics. Out of 57 posters, at least 29 contain images of women in part or in whole. First, the figure of bride. Tremendous amount of images of figure of bride. You can see, again, typical traditional bridal gown she's wearing. Again, the bride, married woman, kind of waiting for someone, of course, this case, husband or visitor, I guess. And this interesting use of, this continues. Again, the smiling bride behind this screens, again, smiling at you. What does that mean? Smiling at husband or visitor. Again, another very similar images repeats one after another. There's a Korea, there's the Buddha image, and there's the bride smiling and kind of half hiding, and but you can see easily the whole image. And also another popular theme of woman image here is dancer performing a traditional dance. a typical setting, as you can see, wearing a traditional dance costume, very colorful, the folding fans. You can see these pictures from 1970s or early 80s, I guess. If you look at easily the costumes of these tourists and here their hairstyles, the Western sitting there. Again, this is a theater performance. It's group dances. You can see another examples. This will continue. There are a lot more, but I selected very few. Another very dynamic traditional dance form there. This again, this is the folding fan dance, which was very popular at that time and still is. And also another type of women appear in these images are musicians playing musical instruments. Let's look at it. Playing jango, this hourglass drum, and play gayagum, the string instrument in a theater setting. These are quite popular and common in 1970s theaters, especially for the tourist, Western tourist. So the highlights of this example is, I think, the 1973 prize winner. There are all kinds of traditional women in one image. You can see here, 1973. We talked about the bride here, and dancer, and even women in bathing. So again, this very strong presence of this femininity in earlier posters in Korea. So, what are the messages in these messages? Why there are so many women, feminine images appeared and used in posters? This is what it, I guess, what it does. The role of entertaining guests falls on the shoulders of women. Again, pretty much similar images we looked at. So they are the one who greet you and entertain the guest. And why they put this woman playing that role. Again, I think they reenact the West's Orientalist views that mystify and gender the East to arise and fulfill desires of targeted tourists. Basically, it's a male gaze, I think. So that's another interesting observation I found. And also the written messages, not only just image itself, the written messages reconfirm this kind of reenactment of Orientalist view to Korea. This is a very popular phrase appeared in posters. The unexplored Orient Korea. We're talking about 1970s and 80s. These are not unexplored, but still this the sense of hermit, hidden. These concepts are frequently used. The hidden beauty of Korea. Let's look at the one of examples here. This is what I meant. The unexplored Orient. This is again image of the famous Bulguksa Temple in Gyeongju. And again, 1981 grand prize. I took the one parts of these posters. The Land of Morning Come. This is 1981, not 1900, but they still continue to use this phrase to appeal what? That's the main question I keep asking here. And discover the unexplored land of Korea. Another example I prepared. Discover the unexplored land. Same theme kind of reappear in a little slightly different form again, the Buddha statue in Gyeongju. And mysterious and hidden images are reinforced through utilizing emissions as the basis on which to recreate abstract shapes. Again, I have an example to show this. What do you think it is? I think it's one of the most abstract image of anything I ever seen, actually. I guess this is basically the shade of trees or forest. If you pay a real close attention here, this is actually the roof of a traditional temple structure, and also there's a stupa standing right behind. So roughly you can interpret this is a picture of a Buddhist temple in Korea, perhaps the Bulguksa in Gyeongju, but it's so abstract, and the effect of it is very clear. I mean, you make you feel what it is. I mean, curious, what's there? What's being hidden, undiscovered? Again, this is re-echo in that context. So I found it very interesting and powerful image. And now let's move on. The second themes that I found out of this analysis of 57 posters, the tradition. Up to this point, we talked about femininity, but now it's tradition. Other theme appears on these posters is tradition or traditionalism. Ancient temples as a central theme or background. I mean, I'll just show you a couple of examples. Temple, and there's the bell in the temple compounds. And so the effect of this using traditional image is like this. Tradition that is still alive, or in the other words, the Orient that still remains is traditional culture. I mean, that's the essence of Orientalism. Tradition is still there, still alive. So this, again, very interesting observation. And also other types of images can be found. The 농악, the famous music, there are the popular icons, images here, and mask dance. And we've seen this already, music performances, and Buddhist statues to Buddhist temples, and also taiga, the yin and yang symbolism. And these are other minor images, but also very frequently used, even today. So what's the tradition this image from the past indicates? So these are images from a very agrarian society that no longer existed. I mean, the middle of 1970s and especially early 80s. I mean, that's when after the economic development plan totally changed the current society, almost transformed to be a very industrial society, and no longer, obviously, agrarian culture existed at the time, but still they use these very agrarian traditional images. And also the objects in the same posters doesn't have the substantial relations. And these are examples that I put here. A shy bride of a traditional Confucian wedding in the back of Buddhist statue. So there's no connection between these two images, but they just put together whatever they are. I mean, makes interesting to foreigners. And it's even not just creating image, but in the early 70s, they rather established a real space to show the traditional life of Korea, who expect to see the traditionalism in Korea. The traditional space also recreated in a real physical space. I have these old pictures. Sorry for the bad resolution. It's very early 1970s. There's opening of Korean folk village. It was quite a news at the time. I'm sure still the tourist group visit the site. Something disappeared for good. That's not, again, the current way of life in Korea. So this is, can be understood in the same context. And of course, there are changes in the 80s. Slightly, the traditionalism kind of weakened as the society transformed itself from agrarian to industrial, from rural to urban. Now we have this interesting coexistence of the past and of the present, which is very different in this nature. So along with the images of hidden Orient, skyscrapers and urban surroundings, they make joint appearance in tourism posters and photographs. So this is basically what I find out after analyzing these posters. Again, I limit the span from early 70s and up to the mid 1980s. So I think images are produced according to particular values and ideologies. Particular values and ideologies. It's not just natural representation of what it is. It's rather interpretation. They are value added and very carefully produced. An image of Korea to attract foreign tourists embodied the desires of the Western gaze. So the Western tourist, what they look for, it's not urban settings, of course, not high-rise buildings and Western way of life. They look for something very Orient, very Korean, in a sense, very traditional. So to respond to that gaze, Korea itself create those images. An image of Korea from the 60s through 1980s demonstrate a process through which Korea become exoticized. Something exotic, mysterious, hidden, and orientalized. I talked about the traditionalism and also duly decontextualized. Talk about these different images kind of put together that has no connection among themselves, but they just, put in a can and gendered. Very feminized expression can be found. So these are basically what I found in the posters during the time. But things are changing. Of course, it'll change. And these are the last examples and directions, new directions we have to pay more attention here. So the images of Korea that stand in stark contrast to the passive gendered images of hidden beauty or land that awaits discovery are making, awaits discovery are making the entrance. What does that mean? This is a long sentence for that. Sorry for this long sentence. So simply, this is passive traditional images. But society has changed. Of course, the culture changed. It's one of, very industrialized, perhaps most westernized city if you visit Seoul these days. So there's difference. So how you deal with these different images. And this is what I found out. There's no farmer's dance. There's no bride smiling at you. There's no Buddhist image. But this gave very strong impression to Western audience especially. I took this from 2002 World Cup soccer game. You can see the football cheering group called Red Devils, 붉은 악마 in Korean. They're wearing these very strong red color shirts, the facial paintings there, the parts of national flag, such a dynamic, which is very opposite to previous image of Korea. Now, this image are being copied and reproduced in so many different tourism posters and images. So again, how you understand these differences and how this evolution or change were made. was very interesting, the point of my analysis. So basically, I'd like to end this special lecture by posing these questions. We looked at the past, looked at the earlier posters. The future task of deciphering how Korea is going to enter the 21st century remain before us. So my following studies should be done to study, let's say, 1990s or early 21st century posters, and also this the process I'll trace in the future too. I hope you can think about the image of Korea by yourselves, and I hope this gave you an interesting look about how the images of Korea has changed over time. Well, thank you very much. 감사합니다.